booktube. I'm a little out of practice. It's been such a long time since I've actually made a video, and I'm gonna apologize for my voice. I got really sick in December twice. I'm still dealing with the ramifications of all that, but I'm feeling a lot better. I feel like filming, so that's what I'm doing. I want to talk about the best books I read last year. I have 15 in total. I couldn't get the list down any shorter, but it kind of works out because there's 10 nonfiction and then 5 fiction. I had a really great nonfiction reading year this year. So we're going to start with those because why not? So, Capital by Rana Dasgupta. This is about the effects of the liberalization of the economy in India in the 1991, I believe, particularly about Delhi. So this book, the title, is interesting because it talks about capital in the economic sense, but also like the capital in the geographical sense, and that Delhi is the capital of India, right? It's an interesting explanation of economics, especially for someone who knew nothing about economics going in. I'm like, what does liberalization of the economy mean? Let's find out. Hopefully this book explains it. And it did very good. And it kind of did this in like recent events, like 1991, like to the present. I believe the book was 2020 or 2021 it was released. And the implications that has when you like infer that information worldwide. And it was interesting that we got to see like views from the incredibly rich and then like the incredibly poor. Yeah, and he was able to communicate these complex economic ideas through anecdotes and through really kind of intriguing characters. You know, real people, but we'll call them characters. Then 1491 by Charles C. Mann is another great book. This is about the Americas pre-contact. So it was, the reason this is on the list is because he'd present this theory and you're going along, you're just like, okay, that, you know, that makes sense, and you know, I can see why this was said, and then he'd be like, no, it was all wrong, here's why. And like, so you'd find yourself like not trusting, like looking at everything very skeptically, you know, trying to look at it in different ways. Every time he presented an idea, you weren't sure whether it was something that he was going to support, show support for, or something that he was going to you know, show evidence against. So I really liked that aspect of the book. And it's also an interesting approach to history because there's not a lot of sources for, you know, pre-contact. So it was interesting the way he had to get the information, which was using a lot of post-contact information, which I thought was a pretty neat way to go about history. Then I also read 22 Murders by Paul Palango and really enjoyed that. That is about a massacre. 22 people were killed in Nova Scotia in April 2020, so at the beginning of the pandemic and everything, and then like this mass murder happens in Canada over the course of 2 days. And so this book is about that, but it's also about the complete and utter failure of the RCMP to do anything. They could have stopped it the first day, the first night, but they let it continue is basically what you have to say when you look at the evidence. So he delves like really deep into it and all the connections and everything, and he had a lot of people contacting him as well. And then if someone was, you know, he'd look into their background, and especially if someone was trying to justify the RCMP actions, you know, someone would contact him and he'd be like, okay, well, your cousin's in the RCMP, so maybe you're a little biased, or maybe you were sent by this cousin, this RCMP officer, to say this information, and then he'd prove that information wrong. Like, it was really incredible how much he like looked into things. Yeah, that was a really eye-opening book, and despite being like 588 pages long, it was like compulsively readable. Like, I did not want to put this book down. I'd read like 300 pages in one go one day. Yeah, so really readable. Talking about more true crime, Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. This is a book about the murder of a young woman and her 15-month-old daughter by a fringe group of fundamentalist Mormons. And this book is not just about that, but it's also about the history of the Church of Latter-day Saints, or more commonly known as Mormons, in like the history of them and how that history led to the philosophy that this fringe group developed, that led to these murders, because it was because of their religion that they committed these murders, their beliefs in that. Yeah, it was, I could talk a lot about this book, but the reason it's on here is because the passion that John Krakauer had for the topic. You know, he'd come across this information, I guess, in his research, and he couldn't necessarily fit it into the narrative, so he'd put it in a footnote. And you could just see that it was just him trying to share all this cool stuff that he found, you know, like, it really came off that passion of his. Next nonfiction is American Fascist by Chris Hedges, and this book is about the Christian right, and when, like, I talk about, like, politics. So about the role of evangelical Christianity in politics and vice versa, the role of politics in evangelical Christianity. So each chapter he'd start with a certain topic, he'd start with a personal experience, he'd actually go out and, like, he took a course on evangelizing, about witnessing to people and trying to convert them. So, like, that's, like, the level that he went to, you know, kind of learn about this movement. And then he extrapolated that with evidence and research into the wider arena of American politics. And this book was published in 2007, and when I took it out of the library, there's another book there published in 1990 something. So, like, this is not a new phenomenon. This influence of fundamentalist Christianity on American politics is not new. It's been going on since at least the 1980s, and this book talks about that. Yeah, and it's also tied into my personal interest in fundamentalist Christianity. Not my interest in becoming a fundamentalist Christianity. I definitely identify as a very progressive Christian, but it was interesting seeing that. Talking about progressive Christianity, the next book on this list is Inspired by Rachel Held Evans. So this is about a lot, but it's mostly about the different storytelling methods used in the Bible. Yeah, it's a mixture of Bible retellings. You know, she'd take the stories and kind of set them in different places or kind of extrapolate more from them. Her own personal journey with deconstructing. She was raised as a conservative evangelical Christian, and theology. So yeah, there's a lot, but it all mixed in really well together and was very memorable because of that. It's a more progressive look at the Bible, which was super nice because I was reading a book on fundamentalist theology, which was very frustrating, and I was just like, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm talking about good books, not bad books. But anyways, like, reading those books together really exemplified this one above the other ones. Her creativeness, like her writing style, her research, all made the book very valuable reading to anyone looking to learn more about, you know, the opposite of what we kind of see when we think of Christianity, and that, you know, that's all over Fox News and stuff like that, like, you know, the stuff that you'd hear about in Christian fascists. Yeah. The next nonfiction, Disorientation by Ian Williams. And this one, there's kind of 3 books, and I wanted to include them all, but Disorientation was the one that went out. Those were Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. But Disorientation, they're all kind of in the same realm in that they're talking about race and talking to their experience, but how that is like a microcosm of the larger issues of racism, but also talking to a young person at the same time. So it's about Ian Williams' experiences as being Black in Canada, the US, and Trinidad. Yeah, it centers on the experience of disorientation. So when a racialized person is reminded of their race, so they're just going about their normal daily business, you know, doing whatever they do, and then, like, something happens around them that they suddenly realize, oh right, I'm Black, I'm brown, I'm not white. I'm not, you know, people are pointing something out about you that in certain countries and certain experiences has certain implications. Racism, generally. I don't know if I'm wording that properly. My brain's still not healed. Yeah, and that creates a sense of disorientation. Yeah, it's just great. The opening chapter about swimming is just great. I've loved 2 out of the 3 books I've read by Ian Williams, so he's on his way to becoming one of my favorite authors. And then we have The Descent of Man by Grayson Perry. This is about masculinity and working on recognizing toxic masculinity and challenging it. And yeah, it's very accessible work about it, about how society creates this idea of masculinity. Grayson Perry, himself is a cross-dresser, so he's, you know, already works on challenging it. And it's interesting, the ideas that he brings up and the way he challenges it. Like, he's not afraid of like just diving right in and telling people, you know, even if they are more, you know, liberal, progressive people, challenging them. Yeah, and how our society is shaped, that normal is seen as heterosexual, middle-class, white, cis male, and challenging that sense of normalcy. Okay, then we have See No Stranger by Valerie Carr, and if pressed, this is probably one of my favorite book of the year. There are some issues ahead with it, but I'm not going to talk about them because I just want to exalt this book. It's about the power of love. You know, loving yourself, loving your family, friends, loving others, loving strangers, and loving enemies, and the power of love. Love in action. And it's a mixture of kind of like self-help, advocating for social justice, and a memoir at the same time. I also learned a lot about Sikhism, which is her religion as well. And I just wanted to share a quote from the book because I think this kind of summarizes it nicely. So, joy is the gift of love, grief is the price of love, anger protects that which is loved, and when we think we have reached our limit, wonder is the act that returns us to love. So I like those notions, you know, joy, grief, anger, wonder. So Curry is another book I read that's on my favorite list here, and that is by Nabeen Rathnam. And so this is, I think it's actually subtitled Food, Literature, and Race, or maybe it's like Food, Writing, and Race, particularly about South Asian descent, so India, Pakistan, and I believe the author is from Mauritius, like Sri Lanka, that kind of, you know, area. And it's about examining identity as a member of the South Asian diaspora, looking at the history of curry as a food, and the fact that there is no real one curry dish. Like, curry is a plethora of dishes, it's not just one thing. I mean, technically it's a plant, but like as a cuisine, it is a lot of different things. So it was interesting learning about food and how like the peppers and the tomatoes in the food actually didn't happen until like the Americas were discovered, because those are like native to America, not to Asia at all. So it was really cool learning about that. He's also very kind of critical of what he calls curry novels, which is where South Asian diasporic authors kind of cave into pressure of what Western white readers expect from a novel by a South Asian author, and kind of dissecting that. Something that was really interesting, actually, that stands out still in this mind is juxtaposing the experience of Jhumpa Lahiri trying to assimilate into Italian culture and the difficulties in doing that, because, I mean, her skin color set her out as different, whereas Elizabeth Gilbert going to India, her experience was a lot different. Even though her skin color was different, white is kind of seen as, you know, this easier, if that makes sense, to assimilate. Yeah, and her experience was different in that she was able to not be a part of the culture, even though she thought she was a part of the culture. I'm talking about Elizabeth Gilbert, because of where she was, and she was kind of like isolated. Whereas Jhumpa Lahiri is actually trying to, you know, integrate into the culture completely. Like, she now translates Italian works, like, you know. So I thought that was really interesting, seeing those two juxtapositions. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the 5 fiction favorites, and this wasn't done like on purpose. This is kind of how it worked out. So, firstly, Sorrowland by River Solomon. This is a book where it's best to go in not knowing anything. Just go in completely blind. Don't read the back of the book. Don't watch reviews. Don't do anything. Just go in and read this book and just be surprised. Go along for the journey. It's definitely an adventure. Solomon is a master of pacing. You know, when there was action, the scenes were moving, and you felt the thrill, and then there were a lot of quieter moments and the pacing slowed down, and you got to learn more about the characters. And the fantastical elements in the book are just, you know, great, but they also felt real. Like, I believed them. Like, the first setting that we're in, I'm just like, I was I was like, is this real? Like, is this real? Like, is this a historical thing that happened? Because it just felt so real. Yeah, it was a really, really good book. I can't say much about it because I don't want to spoil it, and I think you should go in not knowing anything, and just be surprised. Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This is about a young girl. She goes through a lot as a kid. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this book. Look them up, because I don't think I can list them all. Don't depend on me for that. And then her life as an adult, she's asexual or aromantic, a little different, and it's about her relationship with her cousin and her husband. Yeah, and it gets weird. It gets really weird, and that's why I love this book. It was weird, it was gross, it was beautiful, it was traumatizing. At the end I went, what did I just read? Like, what in the world? I think I read the book in like 2 sittings. It was that, like, it's a shorter book, but oh my god, just, yeah. I love Sayaka Murata, and I want to read everything she puts out. Earthlings, I think, is slightly better than Convenience Store Women, but it's totally different at the same time. Just go into it. Maybe not even prepared. Just go into it and read it. It is one mind mess of a book. It's enjoyable. Another weird read, maybe not as weird as Earthlings, is The Literary Conference by Caesar Era. And this is about a man who wants to take over the world by cloning himself, but he wants the army to be led by a clone of Carlos Fuentes, who is a Mexican author. And things go wrong. It's hilarious. It's weird. Yeah, that's all I can say to recommend it. It's hilarious, weird, and it's only 90 pages, I believe. So, I mean, why not take an afternoon and read it? I'm noticing that all of these, except for maybe the last one, are quite short books. Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. This is about a group of vigilante women hunting down these monsters called Ku Kluxes, which are part of the KKK, but they are like literal monsters. They're like these bone demons. And so they have to go around and kill them. And if it's like, it's set in a real world, and then like the monsters are in it, so that feels real. But then there's this whole other fantastical element that kind of made the book for me. That just, I really enjoyed reading. And I don't want to tell you too much about it, because it was also kind of creepy. So it added this extra level of fantastical horror on top of, like, see, like the Ku Kluxes to me felt like they were monsters, but they felt like people monsters. Whereas the fantastical horror was this definitely like fantastical, kind of creepy kind of stuff. So like the mixture of that and the way he was able to do that, I really liked it. And last book is King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. This is the first book in the Crown of Stars series. I read book 1 and half of book 2. That happened in December when I got sick, so didn't finish reading that. We follow 2 main characters. I'm not going to talk too much about them because I'm not, this book isn't on here because of the characters, but there's Leith, who may or may not have magical powers, and then there's Elaine, who may or may not be joining a monastery. That's where we are at the beginning of this series. The reason this book is on this is because of the world building. It's a fantasy, and kind of like a historical fantasy based on medieval Christianity. The religion in the book is really fascinating. There are like words taken directly from like Christian prayers and the Bible and stuff like that, but some of it's also kind of slightly changed. So they have the Lord and Lady. They don't have God. They have a female god and a male god, and the gender dynamics are completely different. The whole family relationships are different. So like, as I said, they have the Lord and the Lady, the male and female gods. The highest religious position in the world belongs to a female. So it's really quite interesting in those ways. Whether a female, I can't remember the right terms, but like the countess is higher, than the count in some places, depending on like birth and stuff like that. And like, another thing that happens is that the heir to the throne is sent out, and within a year they have to have had a kid, or be pregnant, or have their mate be pregnant. And it's not necessarily through marriage and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting seeing these more progressive, I guess, dynamics set in this medieval world. Yeah, and that's mixed with like, there's like fantasy species. We have, weird elves and like weird dark elves. They're called something else. The names are escaping me right now. We have this war going on, which is horrific. There's hints of magic in the first book. Just overall a great fantasy. I love fantasies from like the 80s and 90s. So that really set it for me. So yeah, those are my 15 favorite books of 2022. What was your favorite read? Not fiction and fiction, give me 2, in 2022, and thank you for watching.